Hello, I'm Elizabeth Kears, and I'm going to be talking about Nelson Mandela today. In the life of any individual, family, community, or society, memory is a fundamental importance, is the fabric of identity. Nelson Mandela once said this: "Who is the person that tried their best to their ability to end racial segregation and white minority rule under the South African American apartheid system?" Nelson Mandela was the one to do so, dedicating his life to his beliefs. With the encouragement of Walter Salusa, in 1941 he joined the African National Congress, later or known as the ANC, a multiracial anti-apartheid organization founded in 1912. This marked the beginning of Mandela's enduring struggle to establish justice and equality throughout South African society. Mr. Mandela was South Africa's first democratically elected president. On the 9th of May 1994, soon after our landmark elections results were in, he was unanimously elected president by South Africa's new members of parliament. Nelson Mandela's life was dedicated to establish justice and equality of the South African society. Nelson Mandela did all he could to rid the South Africa of the apartheid system that had a very tight hold on its government. Nelson Mandela's participation in the ANC was beginning to loosen the reins on the apartheid system. Nelson Mandela joined the ANC in 1943. From what the time on, he never lost vision for the ideals that the ANC stood for. The ANC was for most of history from 1912 to 1940 a sedate party, meeting in a conference once a year and undertaking very little activity. This was until Nelson Mandela came along. Their goal was to unite the African people against white minority ruling. Their aim has always been to create a non-racial and democratic South Africa. A branch of structure was instituted, and members of the Congress or the Communist Party began to work throughout the ANC to promote expanding the African urban workforce. In the ANC, Mandela found the way to a free South Africa, but did not come without a high price that he would soon later pay. By 1944, Mandela was instrumental in founding the Youth League, which became a very important part of the ANC. As the most essential element within the ANC, the Youth League helped turn the ANC into a mass movement. African National Congress Youth League is what it later became known as. The group was formed in 1944 by graduates of Fort Hare, a college of African at Alice, a town in Eastern Cape. Prominent members who later became ANC leaders. Together with his friend and partners Olivia Tabu, Walter Salusa, Anton Libidi, who later became the president, they formed the Youth League of Congress. When they formed the Youth League, they had hopes that they could develop a political program around Libidi's African project. Initially aligned with the ANC defense campaigns, the ideals of peace, non-compliance, and protest were the war and order. When they were spurred by the young men, the ANC became more militant, particularly after 1948 when national parties were voted into power by the white electors and began implementing strict apartheid systems. The Youth League put pressure on the members of the ANC to adopt the program of action. Putting more stress, the ANC launched a defense campaign which boosted countrywide membership and mapped the way ahead for the liberation struggle, leading to the adoption of a freedom charter. Members of the Youth League were prominent in the ANC-dominated Congress alliance, using anti-apartheid resistance across the board. Mandela played a leading role in forming the first significant alliance between the African, Asians, and so-called colors of South Africa against the apartheid system. After being imprisoned multiple times for some time for his belief, he never lost sight of his goals. After his release and within the ANC officially banned by the South African government, Mandela's freedom of the movement was restricted more than it had ever been before. As the newly elected leader of ANC, he was now faced with the formidable task of building the ANC underground. Mandela soon violated this restriction, and the government issued a warrant for his arrest. Mandela realized that the peaceful protest was getting them nowhere, and so he co-funded and became the leader of the Spare of Nations branch of the ANC, facing several more brutal attacks against peaceful demonstrations. With this branch of the ANC, Nelson Mandela recognized and was ready to demonstrate the need for a less passive approach to achieving the goal of freedom. The ANC was banned by the government, and though Mandela stayed on the run for 17 months, he was eventually caught and sentenced to life imprisonment. Eventually, again, he was caught and sentenced to 5 years. After being trialed again rather than denied guilty in any legal sense, Mandela convinced that his co-defendants at trial should be used as a temporary to espouse their anti-apartheid beliefs. They were found guilty and left with dignity. In 1990, President F.W. de Klerk, who had become the power after Botha suffered a stroke, lifted the ban on the ANC. 9 days later, after almost 30 years, Mandela was freed. And this became very important because it boosted his campaign being in prison. Despite his ordeal, Mandela's spirit and commitment to ending apartheid had not diminished. Today, many in South Africa are free of the apartheid system that once placed on the government before Nelson Mandela became about. When black Africans were allowed to vote, the ANC Mandela-led party won the election. Nelson Mandela became the first black president of South Africa. Through and with Nelson Mandela, ANC finally won the victory they had envisioned for so long. After many obstacles had faced Nelson Mandela, he still held his strength and accomplished so much for the African society. The impact of Mandela's life on South Africa in the particular and the world in general has been and continues to be tremendous. The extreme sacrifice that he made and the unflinching courage that he exemplified and the dogged commitment that he maintained all served to move millions of people around the world against the apartheid system. Without Nelson Mandela, South Africa would not be the way it is. So, he has changed so many things by just trying to establish justice and equality for South Africa people.